terrorist attack on a Hanukkah celebration at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, leaves 15 dead, including a 10-year-old girl. President Trump gives a speech on the economy. We'll go over some of the awesome economic news for America and Israel. Ben Shapiro slams the Woke Right at Amfest. And finally, is South Yemen the solution to the Houthis? You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Mensch-Kight Geopolitics is your home for conservative commentary on international affairs with an eye toward Israel and the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kite, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, and your prophet of things to come. Welcome back, my friends. As always, I really wish we could just stick with happy news and positive times. Hopefully by now, as this episode airs, everyone will have had a Merry Christmas and a good holiday season. And, you know, people out there, propagandists, Muslims sharing, you know, that we're Jews can't say Merry Christmas. Yes, we tell our Christian friends Merry Christmas. I, for one, I managed to be home for all of Hanukkah, which is rare. Usually have to work part of that time, having responsibilities, you know. So I managed to get home and enjoy some time with the littles, had some great latkes with friends, and lots of sufganiyot. And there will be a need for some exercise. So this is how I want to start an episode. You know, hope we're all having a great time, you know, positivity. The holidays is a great time for family, friends, and think of all the good things in the world. But alas, as we think about Hanukkah, unfortunately this year we have to think about Bondi Beach, where a Pakistani father and son shot 15 people at a Hanukkah celebration, including a 10-year-old girl. Her name was Matilda, and yet another innocent young victim. You know, what kind of person takes a rifle with the scope on it, looks through that rifle, sees a young girl, and pulls the trigger? My friends, I mean, it is evil on a scale. And looking at the videos that Hamas shared and celebrated from October 7th of them shooting children and, you know, the rape and the violence, you know, dragging Naama Levy. I've shared that one because it's not as horrible as some of the other stuff I sadly myself witnessed from October 7th, you know, with the bloodstained pants and this kind of thing. So this is just an awful, awful situation. These people are just... So I know you share my frustration. Morality should prevail. This is what it means when people say globalize the Intifada. This is what it means when all the people are out sharing anti-Israel propaganda and the Jews run the world and the Rothschilds and all this kind of thing and wearing the keffiyehs. This is what it means. This is what they want. They want Jews killed in Israel, in Australia, in the United States. We had more attacks in the U.S. on Jews, more violence here. So a friend of mine, Itai, knows who he is. So he gets a shout out. Half joked, we kind of have a dark sense of humor in the Jewish community, I'll tell you, that they have a new Hanukkah tradition that after lighting the candles on the Hanukkah, the menorah, and the, you know, and saying the blessing, that you duck to avoid the bullets. It's become a situation where Jews are just not safe anywhere. And, you know, it's disturbing. It's becoming, it's just, well, I'm sure as erudite listeners of this program, you guys understand and you share our pain and understand the horrors of all of this. And, you know, Christians in Nigeria are also being killed. President Trump authorized some attacks on Islamic State in Nigeria, in response to their massacring of Christians. Well done. Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, so many of us have called that issue out, and no one pays attention. Tucker Carlson goes and hunts down the one Christian in anywhere around Israel who will say negative things about Israel, and gets that person on the air, but won't say one word, not a single word about the massacre in Nigeria, of massacre of Christians, except to say that it isn't happening. Jews know how this is, my friends, and Christians are beginning to see it too. It's like it didn't happen, and if it did, it's your fault, and you made us do it, and it's all you. So this is the kind of sickening stuff that we're dealing with. Anyway, like I said, I would rather start off with happy news and positivity, but that is not the way that the world works. Just absolute. So, speaking of negativity, we have had a lot of negativity from the Woke Reich, as Bibi Netanyahu calls them, and a number of us call them woke right, if you will, but Woke Reich is a little bit more accurate, since these people say they're Team Hitler and what. Ben Shapiro got up at TPUSA. If you haven't heard the speech, I strongly recommend you go listen to it. It is one of the best speeches ever made at an event like this. If TPUSA can be known for anything, I mean, obviously Charlie Kirk did a lot of things before he was assassinated by a terrorist. But after his death, if TPUSA can be remembered for anything, it'll be this speech by Ben Shapiro, where he called out the woke right, where he called them what they are, that they're amoral, that they are, villainous, that they are out attacking conservatives and attacking Trump and insulting the administration and the American people and the MAGA movement. And he really laid into them. So very well done. Like I said, I strongly recommend you go watch it. It's available on YouTube. And Ben Shapiro he's awesome. So interesting thing. I always thought of Ben's appearance. Years ago when I started the show, I always kind of felt Ben was a little elitist. He was kind of up there, and I didn't like a lot of the way he talks about things. Doesn't like tariffs, doesn't like, he's not connected with working class people. I may be, a conservative, my friends, as you know, but I am also a working man, and I come from a family of landsmen, working people. And he just seemed really disconnected. But it turns out that he is a man of incredible character. And so my criticisms of him in the past, I regret, because he turned out to be a great guy. Just like Charlie Kirk turned out to be a better guy. He called out the woke right and opposed them. So they turned out to be men of very good character. Whereas, a number of people, from Tucker Carlson to Clandis Owens to others have just gone off the deep end, and they get more insane by the day. Anyway, Ben Shapiro made the point that, broadcasters have 5 duties to their audience in terms of honesty, truth, and what have you. Absolutely, 100%, he is right on all of those things. I'm telling you, my friends, it is not easy producing shows like this. I, for one, have to do quite a bit of research and thinking about what I'm going to say, and I have to be kind of careful. Every now and then, even I've shot my mouth off on something. And also, as I've told you guys, reporting things, when they're like when the Iranian missiles were falling down on Israel, I was recording at the time, so I was trying to give you news as it was coming in, and some of that proved to be inaccurate, not because I was trying to mislead you. We did, the reports we were getting were wrong. Later, those reports were corrected, and I was able to make those corrections. We all make mistakes, but I mean, in that case, I have the excuse that, trying to cover something live, meaning that I only get the information that comes in. But like I said, I was able to correct that. But I spend a lot of time working to make sure that what I tell you is true to the best of my knowledge. When I give you opinions, they are well thought out. I don't just come at you with things off the handle. And I don't like conspiracies and this kind of nonsense. As Ben pointed out, and very rightly, it creates a sense of a world of which you have no agency. My friends, this is our world. This is our life. This is the only life and the only world we have. So we have all the agency. We just need to use it. And when people tell you that the world is run as a conspiracy and these people, they killed, they did this. And there's always this vague, specious they out there that you're up against. It just takes away your agency. So great speech by Ben Shapiro. Complete ditto, completely agree. And I try as best I can to bring you accurate information here. Okay. Um, on I'm able to bring it down to lighter note, maybe. I don't know. Historically speaking, I spoke to you guys last time. I was reading Suetonius by Tom Holland, the new translation of the Roman historian Suetonius. His work on the life of the Caesars is a really great original primary source for a lot of the things that happened in Rome. And even he says, well, there was a report that this happened or a rumor that that happened. And I don't know that it's credible, but I'm going to report it to you because people say it and that kind of thing. So we get the sense that Suetonius is trying to get us good information. And I was talking about last time how when Claudius sent a couple of Christians out from the Jewish community, or expelled some certain number of Jews from the Jewish community because of impulsore Christo, because they were spreading the Gospels of Jesus and talking about early Christianity, that at the time they made no distinction. And I also said, well, that implies that no distinction was made even in Suetonius's time when he's writing during the time of Hadrian. No, that wasn't quite correct, because as I remembered shortly after I recorded, he does, during Nero's reign, there is an incident where Christians are called out separately. So they are referring to Christians as a separate movement. During Claudius's time, however, which was, again, that event was purported to be circa 49 CE, that took place. So, 802 ab orbe condita on the Roman calendar from the foundation of Rome. At that time, they weren't making the distinction. But historians at the time, Tacitus, Josephus, a number of them actually have some difficulty discerning Christians from Jews in the early days, even though they are two very separate movements by the end of the first century CE, for sure. Especially the destruction of the temple. Reading a great book. You guys would love this book if you're into history, but it is dense. It's one of the kinds of books I listen to, right? I finished Suetonius. And it's Jews versus Rome by Barry Strauss. Very good book. And he talks a lot about how the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, was a game changer that sent Judaism in a certain direction, for sure, but also took the center of gravity for Christianity away from Jerusalem and spread it out to the diaspora, right? So that it would be out there among, the city of Rome, Greece, places like that. So it's just kind of interesting. But I looking back at the episode, at the time of Suetonius, yes, Christians and Jews were understood to be two separate movements. So the way I said it, and it didn't quite sound right. But anyway, see, here I am making a historical correction. Yeah. You never know what you're going to get on this episode, right? Life is like a box of chocolates. So is this show. You get a little history, a little other interesting. So, like I said, I've some cool stuff to bring you. There's an interesting bit of fun. Tacitus, who's also a historian of that era, and a pretty good one. We use him to kind of keep Josephus honest. Obviously, Josephus was a Jewish historian, but he was also a Flavian, and he writes a lot of what could be called propaganda for the Flavian dynasty, for Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. So you have to be kind of careful. But yeah, Tacitus also, early on, he kind of has difficulty, there's difficulty discerning, but even he, refers to the Jews and Christians separately. And of course, he's writing in similar time to Suetonius. So there you have that. All right. So let's talk about U.S. news. Transitioned into that. If I don't record an episode for like a month, there's so much for me to talk about. And I'm sorry, my friends, this is a hard time of year for me. But also I spent a lot of time with family, and you'll be happy to know I finished writing my book. Well, mostly. I finally got to the end of the book on the Constitution after the Bill of Rights, and now I'm going back and re-editing. And of course, that involves a lot of writing. Early on, when I started off, I had different goals in mind, and I was trying to be more succinct. And now I'm putting in a little bit more detail on the amendments themselves. But basically, the as I said, there are lots of resources out there on the Constitution, on the Constitutional Convention, on the Bill of Rights, on things of that nature, but we've had far less attention paid to the amendments that follow the Bill of Rights, Amendments 11 through 27. And there have been amendments that have been proposed but not ratified, which are a fascinating set of historical stories in and of themselves. And then I went through, different proposals that have come before Congress that have been made out in the public, a couple of notions that different writers or political philosophers, political scientists, and what have you have made, in terms of recommending constitutional amendments and what have you. And finally got to the end of that, talked about what a constitutional convention might look like if one were called. And then I ended with a couple of constitutional issues, like, separate but equal, the Plessy v. Ferguson decision that was reversed by Brown v. Board of Ed, and the civil rights movement, and a lot of that. There's a lot of history there that people don't know, a lot of legal battles, a lot of stuff. And I felt it was important to talk about, even though there weren't a lot of amendments, it does kind of follow in the vein of the 14th Amendment and getting it properly applied. But it's important history to know. And of all things, it is the largest reversal the Supreme Court has ever made. I mean, I did talk about Roe v. Wade in there as well, term limits, all kinds of other issues, if you're interested, because those have been proposed as amendments. But for the Supreme Court, its biggest reversal in American history was the reversal of separate but equal to requiring equal protection of the law. Anyway, the book is coming along. So yes, I've had a month. I've got to get back on the podcast, but I'm now in the editing. It's so wonderful to, you write a book and then you have to edit it and read and read and read and edit this and change that. And then I'll have to go back through it again and edit and read it a second time. Have a few other people read it. I'm hoping to be able to publish it this summer. I'll be self-publishing almost certainly. So, but I'll try to get it out this summer so you guys can have a look at it. But it's been exciting and it's been a lot of fun for me, but it's been a lot of work. Like I said, the closer I get to the end, the more I just want to I've got to zero in and get it done. Anyway. So that's my excuse for not producing an episode for you guys sooner, and I'm very sorry. That's the best I can do. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I did get to have a lot of time with the family around Hanukkah, though, and that was a good time. And a couple times I was able to take the boys shooting, and my oldest daughter shooting. So we also had a little bit of target practice. So we had a good time, and that's a blast. All right. U.S. news. Okay. So this horrible thing, Rob Reiner and his wife were found dead, knifed to death, apparently. Hearing different reports, throat slit, what have you. But let's just say gruesomely murdered, apparently by their son who had mental health problems, found by a family member. And, that got reported out on the news. And Donald Trump wrote his own response to it, in which he included a lot of Rob Reiner's nastiness and political stuff and some negativity about him. And I had a couple of friends message me about this and how they really strongly disagreed. And I had to take a couple of things. So first thing you guys should know, if you don't already know, because Yids will know, but others don't know. So there's a Jewish tradition that we don't speak ill of the recently deceased. When people die, we try to be positive about them and this kind of thing. Well, Donald Trump's not Jewish. He doesn't have this particular tradition. So that's one thing. And the other is if Ali Khamenei died, the dictator of Iran, this is a guy who's killed hundreds of thousands of people. He's responsible for a lot of deaths. So it's not so much that we'd be celebrating his death as we'd be celebrating his inability to kill more people, right? So that's different. But when you have an evil on that kind of scale, somebody who has killed a lot of people, somebody who is wicked, it's different when they die. I don't want to say we celebrate, but we can acknowledge that they can't hurt anyone anymore. That's a good thing. When evil people get whacked, that's not a bad thing. But Rob Reiner said a lot of nasty things. I'm not speaking ill of him, just to describe the story. He said a lot of nasty things, but he didn't hurt anybody. And everyone's entitled to their opinion. I have my opinion, he has his. That's that. So I definitely remember him saying some pretty awful stuff over the years. But that's, the man died, and a lot of people felt that was inappropriate. So, Donald Trump, of course, didn't delete the truth that he shared on that, and that's not his style. Um, Basically, Donald's version of kind of like backing off of something is just leaving it alone. If he feels like it's a valuable thing to him, he'll double down. So Trump didn't double down; he just kind of quieted down and let it go. Rather than deleting the post, he just kind of let it slide from there, which is sort of Donald Trump's way of saying, "Oops." And I kind of understand his style there, but that, like, we have a lot of hate out there right now, and obviously it's not emanating from our side, but it gave the other side a lot of ammo uh, to point out, Trump being petulant and childish and this kind of thing. My friends, he just took the opportunity to express his opinions about a guy who'd been pretty negative. Anyway, I personally was disappointed. I don't support that kind of language. When someone dies, unless they're a really horrible person, we should be somber and sober about it and respectful of, those who have died. Now, Rob Reiner, as it happens, was born Jewish, although he lived a very secular and non-Jewish life. So, there we have that. But so I guess what I'm saying is I was disappointed in the comments, but let's not make a mountain of a molehill. Trump's comments were not violent or hateful. He simply pointed out things that were in the public sphere that Rob Reiner himself said in the public sphere. Again, I'm not speaking ill of it. I'm just making the point that, look, what I say in the public sphere is fair game. I mean, whatever you like me, you hate me, you want to call me names, whatever. That's, but what I say in the public sphere is if I say something wrong or off color or whatever, I'm responsible for it too. So there's that. On the positive side, Trump gave a great speech about the economy. It's really some really exciting news. Really funny. The Woke Right had it out there that Trump was going to announce war with Venezuela. And so the media covered this thing where Trump, instead of declaring war on somebody, he gives this great speech about the economy and affordability and all these kinds of things. So go Trump. The Donald gets a win right there. So I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, he talked about the economy and he talked about all the good things the administration has done this year. And that's led to some improvement in his favorability and the administration's overall, and sort of things head in the positive direction. As I've said, I mean, obviously the tax cuts, the withholdings didn't change, so people are going to get huge refunds in the coming year. The tax policies, withholdings, all that will change. People are going to be taking home more money, especially people who get tips and who work a lot of overtime. Do I work some overtime? Yes, my friends, I do. It's not uncommon for me to have 70 to 80-hour weeks. That's kind of normal in my business. Actually, I'm kind of on the low end. There are times when, I'm the slacker. So anyway, like I said, when you have responsibilities, you've got to put in the hours. But in any event, so yeah, we have a bunch of that stuff. Okay, so Trump gave this great speech, and then we got the news. In the third quarter of 2025, the economy grew at an annualized rate. So if the economy grew at the same rate throughout the year, the overall economic growth would be 4.3%. 4.3% growth, my friends. We don't even have the fourth quarter numbers yet, although those are going to be impacted by the government shutdown. Unfortunately, a large chunk of the economy really does rely on the government. So I wouldn't expect by next year, when we get the fourth quarter numbers, I wouldn't expect them to be much higher than 4.3, maybe closer to 5%, annualized rate, just because of the shutdown. But my friends, in the first quarter of 2026, certainly by the second, we could see 5% growth. By this time next year, when I do next year's wrap-up episode of the year, we could be at 6% growth. Donald Trump said we'd get 5-6%. He's not lying. We're headed in that general direction. In 1 year, we went from this stagnant economy with high inflation to 2.7% inflation, which was lower than the projected 3%. And we have much higher growth. The target rate for inflation is 2%. That's kind of an arbitrary number economists arrived at. Somebody was asking me, as I talked about it last time, 4% being target employment, what we call full employment. And so somebody asked, so where did we get the 4% from? Well, my friends, some economists did some math, and then they all kind of agreed this was they just came up with numbers. All right. A lot of economics is just, what we decide, what economists decide to call a number or whatever. But generally speaking, when you have 4% unemployment, you have enough people that are looking for work that the labor market isn't completely, let's say, a buyer's market, an employee's market. But you also don't have so much unemployment that it's an employer's market. It's more or less, not always, it's more or less where the supply and demand meets. Now, as you're going to know, because as soon as I've said it, you know, the supply and demand curve for labor is going to move around when the economy changes, right? And that kind of thing. So that's a dynamic number. It's not a set solid thing. You can't just say, well, 4% is good. But generally speaking, when there's 4% unemployment, we can say, hey, you know, the economy is good. We're at full employment, you know, and that's a generally happy thing. So I tend to go with that kind of thing. And it's one of those things where when there are those kinds of measures and people choose to ignore them, it gets stupid fast. Scott Bessent, our illustrious Secretary of the Treasury, excellent Secretary, has pointed out that while the 2% goal for inflation is kind of arbitrary, they are trying to get to that goal. And then he thinks once they've achieved that goal, they may adjust further, because the fact is, like, he doesn't want to do the thing that a lot of, you know, Democrat administrations will do, where, you know, unemployment is, you know, 6%, so we're going to change the way unemployment is calculated, or well, our goal should be 6%. You know, you raise the bar, right, so that you know, you don't have to, you know, well, I guess you raise the numbers is lowering the bar, I guess, is the proper metaphor, isn't it? But anyway, you make it easier to get the numbers you want, make it sound good. You know, it's one of those things like, you know, if I can run a mile in 15 minutes, but my goal is to run it in 12 minutes. And I just say, well, you know, I think 15 minutes should be the goal now. Right? The way you get improvement, of course, is setting goals, right? Like, you know, businesses do. Like, can we grow 5% this year? Can we get 10 new customers? You know, you can't rest on your laurels. But anyway, okay, so you get the idea. So there's that. Other disappointing news. I'm going to do this really quickly because it's really frustrating. So in a recent question and answer, J.D. Vance has disappointed a large chunk of the MAGA coalition, the MAGA base, once again. He, you know, in answering somebody's question, pointed out that he doesn't believe that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, and that the criticism, you know, Israel's negative image results from, you know, Israeli actions themselves. And we're back to this thing where, you know, if people hate Jews, it's the Jews' fault, right? The Jews did it. What are Israel's actions? Just in brief, because I'm going to have a separate Israel section. Israel's actions have been self-defense from the beginning. Right, like, you know, Jews were defending themselves and declared independence. We've been defending ourselves ever since, destroying Hamas after the horrors of October 7th. You know, yeah, they dig tunnels. They're under hospitals. They hide behind civilians. That's how they fight. They want large number of civilian casualties. Nevertheless, Israel has given Hamas a serious bloody nose while having the best urban combat record in history, the smallest number of collateral casualties of deaths and injuries of non-combatant civilians. Although it's hard to talk about civilians in a place where, you know, when they came back with the hostages, everyone was lining up to spit on Shani Lok's body, or to watch them drag Naama Lebi around the Jeep with her bloody pants shouting Allahu Akbar, because, you know, that's the kind of culture. And a lot of civilians, quote unquote, went with the terrorists to commit the attack. So for me, this implication by Vance is strike three. He attacked Zelensky. He has shared Russian narratives on behalf of a foreign dictator against our allies. Just recently in his speech, he said, you know, Ukraine, send our money to Ukraine. America has sent $105 billion to Ukraine. Whatever the Biden administration appropriated over and above that didn't get over there is our corruption and our problem over here that has nothing to do with Ukraine. But the $105 billion, 90% of which was weapons. Not money, weapons. Weapons sent over there. You know, the value of those weapons is what is considered a contribution. And we were going to have to pay to dispose of those weapons anyway. Shipping them to Ukraine was much less expensive than the disposal. So Ukraine saved us money there. But that $105 billion has taken Russia from a major serious military threat, one of the largest threats to the United States on paper, to a paper tiger. a country that is far less dangerous to the United States today. Basically, Russia is only a threat to the United States in the sense that China is a threat. And because China is a threat, whatever Russia has is a threat. If it weren't for, if either Russia or China were removed from the geopolitical map, if one of those two Axis powers were to fall, then the other would be far less dangerous. And that's why I've been saying, let's defeat Russia. Okay, so he did that. Then recently, somebody used a racial slur about J.D. Vance's wife, Fuentes, and then these Nick Fuentes, Twink Hitler, or Twinkler as I like to call him. If you don't know what a twink is, go look it up. Go ask Grok. Sort of Gen Z slang. Not a nice thing to call somebody, but that's what he is. He's Twink Hitler. Used a racial slur about J.D. Vance's wife and said he's going to try to stop Vivek Ramaswamy from running governor of Ohio and all this kind of stuff. And J.D. Vance said nothing. And when he did finally respond in an interview, he said, well, anybody who doesn't like my wife can eat blank. Insert expletive here. It was a very childish response. If somebody insults your wife, you need to stand up and come on, like what kind of man lets somebody else attack his wife? That was a perfect opportunity to call out the woke right and the racism and the evil that they represent, and he blew it. That was strike two for me. And on the heels of that, we get this comment about, it's not anti-Semitism, it's Israel. If people don't like Jews, it's the Jews' fault that they don't like them. If that were just standalone, I could maybe forgive that. The character flaw of not defending his wife and not calling out the woke right. I mean, those together, that's pretty serious. But that and spreading the talking points of a foreign dictator, no, it's very clear that J.D. Vance does not care about our allies or America's power in the world. He is not a patriot. His version of America first is China first. And if he becomes president, my fear is China will, intimidate Southeast Asia, take over the South China Sea, and intimidate and control the Southeast Asian countries and the Philippines, take Taiwan. They'll intimidate Japan, and at a certain point, they will cross a line that we can't let them cross, and there will be a third world war. That's how you get a war. It's that kind of attitude. And right now, Putin and Xi have very little to fear from Vance because the way he talks, he's a wimp. He will let these dictators do whatever they want and get away with whatever they want. I guess that's fine for J.D. Vance. I have sons who are coming of age and are of military age in the coming years. I don't want my sons to have to go to war when we could have prevented it. If we have to fight to defend this country, my family's been there before. We've fought in all the wars up till now. We'll fight again if we have to, okay? But I would much rather we didn't have to fight. But this is the kind of weakness, the projection of weakness that we just got rid of with the Biden administration. Now, if it were just me that he was ticking off, that'd be fine. But now that I've, hearing from conservative friends and Reagan conservatives, national security conservatives, and others, everyone's saying the same thing. There's a huge chunk of the Republican Party who no longer supports J.D. Vance. He has officially broken the Trump coalition. Now, he's antagonizing a third of the Republican Party or more, and a big chunk of the MAGA base, which is bigger than the Republican Party. He's driving away the center left. His flirtations with the woke right have already turned them off. This was like strike 12 for them, for a couple of my friends on the center left. And so there you go. I was really happy to hear Ted Cruz has announced an exploratory committee to run for president. Marco Rubio has said he will not run if J.D. Vance is still running. What did I say a few years ago? J.D. Vance, it would be his primary to win. 2028 was his election to win. And the biggest threat to J.D. Vance was him shooting his mouth off, which he has now done. So Vance has broken the Republican coalition. He's lost my support. And I don't even think his apologies or a change of heart would change my mind. And that's what I'm hearing from a lot of others. People who voted for Trump, center-left, and national security Republicans, Reagan Republicans, people who are really big on our allies and our alliances, they are not willing to support him. So we're kind of done there. Anyway, so, I mean, When you want to succeed a president, don't break his coalition. And who does he think he's going to get by doing so? I mean, so now that he's antagonizing a third of the Republican Party and a huge chunk of the Trump coalition, for what? This microscopic, non-existent minority? I mean, of the TPUSA attendees, only 13% polled said that they thought Israel was not an ally. And that's overrepresentative of young people. There are more of these nutterballs showing up at TPUSA than there are out there in real life. So for 5 people, he's going to tick off millions of Trump voters. Smart move, buddy. Smart move. All right. We had the media real quick. Going after Pete Hegseth over proposed war crime. You'll notice how quickly that fizzled out, in part because Trump then, went after people like Mark Kelly. He's like if you're going to go out and cast aspersions, you can be called back into active duty and tried under military law for, the spreading lies and this nonsense. And that shut that down real quick. Also, there was no traction. These drug smugglers, these people run fentanyl and drugs into this country. They kill 100,000 Americans a year. Right? That's a lot of people. And I think most Americans are tired of the drugs and the drug running. And so, if these guys are getting whacked, that's preventing drugs from coming into our country. That's a good thing. We have to fight this drug war like it's a real war. On that, purportedly, they're trying to claim that, 2 guys were in the water. The military has already made it very clear. The 2 guys were in the water, were actively trying to communicate with their bosses to get back, to be rescued. They were trying to recover drugs, to, clinging to them so that they could sell them. They were engaged actively in trying to, be rescued and continue their mission. In the military, if that's the case, that is not what we mean by hors du combat. Hors du combat means that you are out of battle. You're not able to fight. And if you're trying to fight, okay, so that just went nowhere. I just had to make a comment about that. The Fed finally cut rates, 25 basis points. Quarter point high cut, finally. Quarter point is better than nothing. Half point would have been better. Liquidity isn't the main problem, and the economy is growing pretty quickly. I'm just, like I've been telling you, I'm worried about the banks. There's a lot of unrealized losses out there. $600 billion of it, 2/3 of which is with local banks. As Secretary Bessent has noted, the local banks are disappearing. Smaller banks are being destroyed by the financial regulations of the Obama and Biden years. And so he's working to rewrite those regulations. But in the meantime, those banks are in deep trouble. And the lower rates will help, and the growing economy will help prevent that from being a problem. Then there's this affordability. So where the Democrats have managed to get some traction, this is kind of funny, is with affordability. So the Democrats create an affordability crisis. They make everything expensive. They drive up inflation. They make it, unaffordable to live. And then they have the chutzpah, the bad attitude, to turn around and try to blame Trump for it. Unbelievable. But it is the one issue that's had a little bit of traction. And, that's one of those things where patience is what's called for. Inflation is down. Some prices are coming down, gas prices are coming down, food prices are coming down. But in order for prices to decline radically, you have to have a market correction. In other words, in this case, a major depression. A major depression is the only thing that would bring down prices significantly. So the change we need is not a question of, well, the houses are too expensive. What we need is for people to earn more income. And we're getting there. We have good wage growth. We have good economic growth. We have a booming economy. Life is good. So last sort of 2 issues in one for American news that I'm going to talk about is it's filibuster and it's Congress. So we saw with the government shutdown that the Democrats used the cloture vote, which I wrote about in my book, History of the Cloture Vote. So if you want to learn all about where that came from, there's a section on it in the book. But the issue there is you have to have 60 senators vote to end debate. And as long as someone's holding the floor and as long as someone is speaking and they're holding a filibuster, you can't close the debate and hold a vote on a bill. And so they use that, as many minority parties have over the years, to prevent the continuing resolution from passing, and therefore we had a government shutdown. Okay, so that's what happened there, right? We're headed back to that. There was a compromise. A continuing resolution was passed that expires in January. So we're coming back to this issue. Now, so Ron Portman up in Wisconsin, conservative Republican senator, has been making the point that the Democrats tried to get rid of the filibuster back in 2022, which is also discussed in my book. And, two senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, tried to, they voted against it. They prevented the filibuster from being eliminated. And because they did that, they were both run out of Congress, right? Neither of them serves in the Senate today. So the next time the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they're going to get rid of the filibuster. It's over. It's already done. We can just don't even try to pretend that that won't happen. We can just understand that the filibuster is gone. It's over. Not because we want it to be over, but because they want it to be over. If the Democrats win everything in 2028, in 2029, they will get rid of the filibuster, they will pack the Supreme Court, and they will pass whatever bills they want, spending whatever money they have to make sure that they will never lose power again, right? So why don't Republicans act now and get rid of it, right? There's what's called the nuclear option, 51 votes, the Senate, we can just get rid of the filibuster. To do that, we should have an excuse. So I say the Republicans should put forward a continuing resolution, continuing spending under the big, beautiful bill, doing the things that Republicans are doing now. And, that's good stuff for the Republican base. If the Democrats won't pass it, then you just say, look, we don't want to have another government shutdown. We're getting rid of the filibuster and we're going to pass the continuing resolution, right? And then go from there. And then that relates to the issue of healthcare, which is also being wrapped up into this because when they passed Obamacare, the Obamacare subsidies are expiring. That bill was passed with only Democrat votes. Republicans have no fingerprints on it, no responsibility. But when the subsidies go away and the healthcare costs go up, then, of course, we'll be the ones who get the blame, right? Well, I think there's a fair way to do that. And in the short term, it'll require some compromise to keep the subsidy system in place and to keep healthcare funding in place. But I think the larger thing is Republicans need to pass a healthcare reform. In order to do that, you have to get rid of the filibuster. Democrats are not going to give Trump that victory. Another thing that could happen, you get rid of the filibuster, the next day pass the SAVE Act, which the House has already passed, but a bill that requires voter ID for all federal elections, that requires, that gets rid of mail-in voting. You have to have a reason for absentee voting. Most voting will be in person. It will help secure our elections and restore faith and confidence in our electoral process. So, get rid of the filibuster, pass the SAVE Act, pass a healthcare reform, and do that. And with the healthcare thing, if you extend the subsidies or give it one more year and then in the meantime pass a healthcare reform, or as Donald Trump has noted, just give people the money instead of giving the subsidies to the insurance companies, which is what really happens in the exchanges and all this kind of thing. Give people money and let them go shop for whatever they want. The free market will prevail, right? So there's a couple of different options there. Would be interesting to see how that goes. But do something. It's time to act. Again, the filibuster is basically already gone. The main thing I think Republicans need to do on that, because, we've been talking about, the Dems want to have the hospital emergency rooms reimbursed for emergency room costs and what have you, which, as we know, means that illegals can go in and the hospitals can be reimbursed for that. How about we pass a compromise and we allow some subsidies to reimburse the emergency rooms, but only for people who can prove that they are citizens and residents of the United States. The American people are overwhelmingly against illegals receiving benefits of our social welfare system here in the U.S. That, I think, is a smooth political move, and it will encourage many of these illegals to go home. Already, the federal government has deported something like 500,000 people so far, mostly criminals that they're hunting down. That is, people who've committed other crimes here. Obviously, it is a crime to cross the border illegally. but they've committed other crimes since they've been here. But, like 2.5 million people have self-deported, have voluntarily left. And it's already bringing down rent prices. It's already doing good things for the economy. It's already improving the job situation for Americans. And I just really want to see it get back to 6 million, get up to 6 million, because that will get rid of the Biden era illegals. Now, there are illegals from before that. There are, we keep it going, but at the very least, get rid of these benefits that draw them here. So, all right, that's me cramming through American politics in that. So I have some comedy for you for a couple of minutes from Elon Gold, kind of in the vein of Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason was a longtime Jewish comedian, really funny guy. And here Elon Gold is kind of doing, making Jewish humor this way, but Jews will have a much bigger laugh about this because we kind of know how things are. But, this kind of explains why the whole Hanukkah bush doesn't work, why Jews can't have a tree during the winter, because of all the rules and regulations we would write about it. So have a good laugh, because I want to bring cheer and positivity into this holiday season. And I've had a lot of negative news to talk about. And then I will discuss Israeli news.
The main reason I am so happy we do not have Christmas trees as part of our holiday celebrations is because if we did, there would be 1,000 rules. There would be a tractate of Talmud, Massacre Ha'etz. And it would just be chapters and chapters of rabbis arguing over how you shecht the tree, when and where to chop it down, if it has a blemish, can you even shecht it at all? You must inspect the tree for any rot or a bird's nest. If you see one, you have to shoo the mother bird away and save the eggs for your Seder plate. Can a non-Jew cut down the tree for you? Once you've selected your tree, you and the tree should go down to your local mikvah and immerse yourselves in the water, and you should be as naked as the tree as you both dunk 3 times. Big machloket, big disagreement when you're bringing the tree into the house. Do you make the bracha before you enter the doorway? Hillel says as long as both feet haven't crossed the threshold, it's fine. Shammai says no, even if one toe steps foot into the foyer, it's too late to make the bracha on entering, but they both agree you could still make the bracha on mounting. But before you make the bracha, you should flip the tree upside down. Then you make the bracha, and then turn it back right side up, and shake it in every direction, like you just won something. And when standing the tree up, you should have in mind all the fallen trees that didn't have the zechus to make it to become a Christmas tree. And when decorating the tree, and this is crucial, you must string the lights right to left, but light them left to right. And if God forbid one of the bulbs is out, the whole string's no good. Some say as long as it's dim. If you read the Rashi says the word dim also includes a flicker. If it's just a flickering, then it's okay, because any bit of light can still illuminate the darkness. And once the tree is lit, you should not derive any benefit from the tree. If you want to read a book, you put a lamp next to it. If the lamp goes out, throw the book on the floor, run out of the room. And lastly, if chas v'sholom, God forbid, even one stem breaks off, the whole tree is garbage. But you can't just throw it away. You gotta chop it up and save it for next year's chach on Sukkot.
You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics with Isaac Kite. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. Now you're messing with the son of a mensch. All right, hope you had a good laugh. I try to bring a little light and laughter and a little fun. Next time I'll be back with Eamon's Minute and we'll do that. But in any case, it was worth a chuckle. Okay, Israeli news. Thankfully, that's a little bit shorter today. Obviously, there continue to be ongoing violations of the ceasefire in Gaza. The Hamas keeps attacking Israel. They're rebuilding themselves, and they're trying to make it look like they're still the front line and that they're still active in doing things. Israel has, of course, been raiding terrorist hideouts and what have you in Judea and Samaria, what the international community erroneously calls the West Bank. And so now we're getting people, there's a genocide in the West Bank. There isn't a genocide anywhere around there. The only genocide is the attempted genocide by the Palestinians against Jews. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that. But the security situation is tense, but Israel is on top of it, and they're maintaining security and doing a bang-up job of it, much better than right before October 7th, so 2023. Anyway, so there's that. And things are heating up in Syria and what have you. I'll talk about that here in just a minute. There's been some talk of Bibi Netanyahu seeking a pardon. So he has sought a formal pardon from President Herzog. And so there's been some talk about this issue. I want to talk about it real quick because it's fun, kind of an interesting structural thing. So the president of Israel is a head of state who is a limited ceremonial office, right? Most of the power is in the cabinet, not really the prime minister precisely. The prime minister is certainly the most powerful cabinet member, but generally in the cabinet as a body. And the president makes speeches and does all kinds of ceremonies and events, appoints the head of the central bank and does a couple of other little minor roles in the government. But for the most part, the president is like the Queen of England or, now the King of England, King Charles III, largely ceremonial, not really an active member of the day-to-day government. Right. So Bibi's got these cases. I've talked a lot about that. The cases are somewhat plausible. Some of them are obviously hyped up. There was an attempt to get him out of office back in 2019. Obviously, that was 7 years ago almost. That did not work. Israel had 4 elections in 2 years because of it, because the one center-right party and a bunch of left-wing parties wouldn't sit in government with Bibi. I talk a lot about that in the early episodes of this podcast. So if you want to go all the way back to when it was Inside Israel News and I first started, you can go back and listen to all that. And it's fascinating. But it's more like reading Suetonius now because it's years ago. So it's part of the historical record. When did this happen? When did they know this happened? When was it understood that it was possible that Naftali Bennett could become prime minister? Well, Isaac was talking about it at this time. So, and I was right ahead of the headlines on that. So there are a lot of things. Anyway, so Bibi is seeking a pardon from the president. The president of Israel can issue a pardon. Now, the president could issue a pardon. The president could refuse to issue a pardon, or the president could issue a pardon for something. All right. Quick step back just for a second. In the United States, and you will learn this if you read my book, accepting a presidential pardon is considered an admission of guilt in the American system. So if someone has been accused of fraud and President Trump pardons that person, or if they've been convicted of a crime, to be pardoned, whether you have been convicted or not, is an admission of guilt. You can refuse a pardon, right? But accepting one in the American system is an admission of guilt. In the British system, the common law, where our legal tradition comes from, accepting a pardon does not constitute an admission of guilt. And likewise for Israel, because Israel's legal system comes out of the British common law. It was a British colony, the British Mandate of Palestine. So it's the only time it's ever been called Palestine for 20 years as a British mandate. So anyway, there's that. So Bibi could get a pardon without admitting guilt. Okay. And that gets rid of his cases and that kind of thing. The question now is, would President Herzog offer him the pardon in exchange for an understanding that Bibi will serve out the remainder of this term? This government will probably go the rest of 2026. There has to be an election in the autumn before the winter for new Knesset, new government. But will Bibi run again? Right. So could Herzog offer him a pardon in exchange for Bibi retiring at the end of this term? And that's a very interesting question. So keep that in mind. It's entirely possible. We will see what ends up resulting from those discussions and what happens. Because, if Bibi intends to run again, and he's kind of been talking about that, well, they may not be willing to give him that pardon. But now you know about it. And so if you hear something in the news, you'll already know what's up, because you're the most erudite audience in the world. You know everything that's going on. Okay. Big issue, the big news that I want to get to is the question of aid. The U.S. sends $3.8 billion of aid to Israel every year. It has for some years. That amount has been fixed for more than a decade. And as a result, the value of that aid has decreased over the years because we've had inflation. So it is worth considerably less now than it was when it began. So Israel is already kind of phasing out aid in that sense because the dollar amount has been fixed. But we saw when Israel went into Rafah and rescued hostages against the stated wishes of the Biden administration. Like, who cares? But anyway, he's just going to say, just don't. And everyone did. Because no one's going to take "don't" as a reason not to do something. They're going to need something more tangible, like actual consequences. Anyway, so the U.S. government under Biden threatened to withhold 2,000-pound bombs from Israel if Israel did not, listen to them and do as the administration wanted. And the 2,000-pound bombs had nothing to do with the war in Gaza for the most part. Israel uses smaller munitions there usually. Sometimes they use those munitions on heavy Hamas facilities and what have you. But that was mostly a question of being able to use those in Lebanon against Hezbollah, which is a much more serious threat. Was before the beepers anyway. So, but this is another thing. So, Israel was given the aid. Israel bought the bombs, had already paid for them. They were scheduled to be delivered, and they were delayed because of politics. And Israelis are kind of done with this. And there's been discussions over the last 20 years. A lot of Israelis, especially on the Israeli right, have been wanting to do away with U.S. aid. Israel appreciates the support of the United States, and they appreciate the alliance, but Israel wants to stand on its own. The other thing is, it's a huge part of Israel's economy that Israel hasn't developed. Uniforms, munitions, fighter planes. Israel can make those things. But we don't because, Israel doesn't. I'm an American, but Israel doesn't. We, the Jewish people in general, I guess, I can say. But no, Israel doesn't make these things because the U.S. offers them. It offers aid. So Bibi Netanyahu has announced over the next 10 years, $110 billion, 350 billion shekels, will be invested in the Israeli defense industry so that Israel can produce a lot of the things that it receives aid for. And this will make the aid either redundant or no longer necessary. So look to some discussion in the coming year or two about reduced U.S. aid to Israel on these lines, right? Bibi's investing the money. And that means Israeli jobs and Israeli economic growth. Now, for Israel, as I talked about last time, the Israeli economy is looking to grow by like 12.5%. Now that there's a ceasefire. So Israeli economy is booming back. 2026 is going to be a great year for Israel and the Israeli economy, just like with the US. So that'll be a good thing. One example of that, of course, is that NVIDIA is, they're investing $1.5 billion in Israel in developing facilities and such there. And there's been all this pressure on them because of this nonsense about the genocide and all this kind of thing. And NVIDIA doesn't care. They're investing anyway. Okay, so Israel has also made a number of defense deals worth billions of dollars, selling technology to various European countries, including Greece. And we just had this thing where Greece, Cyprus, and Israel have signed a defense pact. They're becoming more aligned defensively against Turkey, because Turkey has been more hostile toward Israel. People have been telling me, what should we call this? I think we should call it the Thermopylae Accord. Thermopylae, of course, being the battle where the Spartans fought, the 300 against of King Leonidas against Xerxes' army, the Persian army there that bought time for the Athenians to prepare defenses and ultimately saved Greece. So there you are. That is a great thing. But so here we are, Israel has allies in the Arab world. Israel has allies in Europe now, Cyprus and Greece. Israel is growing economically, gaining allies, gaining strength. Things are good. And that brings us to the big picture. Speaking to a friend recently had brought me into a group, a Bible study of his, and asked the question, what is God's role in what's happened recently? And I made the point, you cannot fail to see the hand of providence here. Israel's economy, Israel's ability to defend itself. It is very clear that for the moment, at least, Israel is blessed and that we are succeeding the Jewish people on a broad scale. As much as we're being attacked and receiving all this negativity, you have to see the hand of providence in all this, all of this has come together at just this time and just this way. And I don't miss that. I see it. I understand it. It does not escape me is what I'm trying to get at. And I just want to take a minute to be grateful to Hashem for his blessings and to understand, men and women of faith are, we have to have that humility to think that, we cannot imagine ourselves to be gods and to be all the things, we must humbly accept that there is a higher power, a power who sets morality for us, does not allow us to decide what is moral based on whatever we think. So take a minute to acknowledge that. But like I said, you can definitely see the hand of providence at work in Israel's ability to defend itself, in their ability to take down Iran, and in the overall result that we are more prosperous than we were before, and gaining friends, gaining allies, and that is a wonderful thing. So Baruch Hashem, thank God we have this, these blessings. All right. Briefly, I want to talk about Yemen and Syria. We'll start with Syria and the Kurds. This guy Golani, al-Shara, as he likes to go around, in suits and wine and dine with Europeans, talks a good talk about peace. But then his forces have started moving in on the SDC, the Syrian Democratic Coalition, which is, essentially the Kurds along the northern strip of Syria and over in the northeastern corner up against the Iraq border. And of course, that part of Iraq, the northern part of Iraq, is increasingly called Kurdistan. It's basically its own country in everything but name. Here we've seen in Somaliland, in Kurdistan, in a number of places, including what I'm going to talk about in South Yemen, new countries are forming de facto, and the international system is not set up for acknowledging them. Meanwhile, they're all out to recognize a Palestinian terror state that doesn't exist, that's run by Hamas. So Whew. Okay, anyway. I'm just going to take a moment to say it. Free Kurdistan. I support a free and independent Kurdistan. I support Greater Kurdistan. I would like to see Eastern Turkey, Northern and Eastern Syria, and Northern Iraq all together in one Greater Kurdish state. It is a crime against human decency that that state did not come into existence 100 years ago. And the Kurds were cheated out of their state then. Now the Kurds deserve to have their state. And obviously, Kurds are very pro-Israel. So, with that said, the Syrians, Shara, his new, Islamist government. Remember, this guy is an Al-Qaeda terrorist who, again, now puts on a suit and goes around the world whining and dining with the world's leaders like he's, Bashar al-Assad. This guy and his forces are attacking the Kurds again, which is not that surprising considering that they've been backed by Turkey. So we see why they're attacking the Kurds. The Turks don't like the Kurds for a lot of reasons, mainly that Kurds have a higher birth rate than Turks, and the Kurds geographically control eastern Turkey. The region used to be Armenia during the Roman Empire. And it's kind of looking like Turkey, if the Turks don't get their birth rate up, is going to become a Kurdish country. And the future looks good for the Kurds and not so good for the Turks. Like I said, Kurds are more favorable toward Israel. Anyway, so the Syrians are attacking the Kurds again. The Kurds are preparing to defend themselves, and they have signed a defense pact now with Israel as well. So Israel has more allies in Syria. They will help defend the Kurds if the Kurds are attacked. So there you are. Israel is defending minorities, and the Kurds are also concerned about the Druze and the Christians and other minorities in Syria. So this was not just Israel defending the Kurds, it's also about generally the two of them defending minorities in Syria. So that is a very positive sign and a very positive step. Syria continues to be a mess, and this guy, Shara, is a terrorist. He's still a terrorist. He can put on a suit and he can drink, go and wine and dine with foreign leaders, but he still cannot, as the Romans used to say, the fox changes his hair, but not his ways. He is still what he is. Okay? So that's that. And then there's South Yemen. Last thing for the Middle East and the Israeli news segment. So when I did the Yemen segment back a couple of years ago, I described the three factions. You have the Houthi rebels who are Shiites. They're up in they were kind of in the northern part of the interior, in a corner of Yemen. There is the internationally backed government, which included what is now South Yemen for a good amount of time. And they've been fighting the Houthis very ineffectively for some time, but they're receiving a lot of international money and weapons and this kind of thing. And then there is South Yemen. Yemen used to be two separate countries, and South Yemen had its own thing going on. And when they ended up uniting with Yemen, they thought this would be good for both countries. It turns out that they got the short end of the deal, the short end of the stick. They did not get a good deal from unification. So now South Yemen, with the backing of the UAE versus, the Yemeni so-called internationally backed government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia and the international community. Anyway, South Yemen has basically, told the internationally backed government what to go do with themselves. And they have gone and liberated the remaining territory of the former South Yemen. So the former South Yemen is now under the control of forces loyal to a former South Yemen. So South Yemen, or what some are calling South Arabia, as another possible name, since Yemen's kind of a failed state and the whole thing's kind of a mess, right? This new state is coming into existence. And while these are not necessarily good guys, okay, it's not people that we would like or that you want to have, milk and cookies with, they are not the Houthis, right? And they want to create a country, they want prosperity, and they're kind of done with the Houthis and the terrorism and all the starvation and all that. That's a positive step. A step in the right direction would be a good thing. One thing to watch with South Yemen and South Arabia is this, the Wadi in the middle of the country is this big kind of valley delta area, dry, Wadi is kind of like a dry riverbed valley area, where Al-Qaeda has a lot of operations, and that's, territory from which they've attacked the USS Cole and what have you. They are not allowing international press into that region, which is good because those reporters would not be safe in there. And there's been talk of them clearing that out. getting rid of al-Qaeda. If they do that, that will be a positive step. The internationally backed government has been forced to give up. They had to give up the territory that was taken by South Yemen. And there's been talk of South Yemen pressing into the rest of Yemen and working to liberate the former capital of Sana'a. They've liberated Aden, which is the former capital of South Yemen, but now they have also moved towards Sana'a. And if they can, like, since the internationally backed government has been impotent and ineffective, and now they just control a couple of tiny sections of the former Yemen, when the two countries were split, one of which, they have a town that's besieged. So, I mean, they're not doing very well there. If they just give up and just join with South Yemen, let the South Yemenis be independent, and then South Yemen could push into Yemen and be a counterweight to the Houthis. Imagine the safe travel of ships through the Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea. That would be past the Bab el-Mandeb Strait there. That would be beautiful, right? So I'm kind of with the whole, let's let the South Yemeni have their independence, let them take over the oil facilities, let them kick out the Houthis, and let's see if they're any better. And any step in the right direction is a positive one. So look for that in the news. So that's kind of where the Middle East is for now. And obviously I'll have more time to talk about that stuff next year, when hopefully I'm not recording episodes once a month. Oy. Anyway, all right, let's close out this section. I'll come back with the international section, which is going to be a little bit brief this time, but still interesting. Oh, I'm kind of talking like Ben Shapiro today, trying to get everything out quickly. Trying not to go too fast for you. I'm sorry. I wish I could take more time and talk more in depth, but this is the price of me focusing on my book rather than the podcast. But I hope you'll love the book too. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, couple of things. Cast wins in Chile, the first right-wing victory there in a long time. For the first time, the right controls their Congress. I mean, it's just huge. This is awesome, and it didn't take a Pinochet style coup. They just, they just did it. They just elected the right, and already Chile's economic prospects are beginning to improve. But I mean, considering what Milei has done, can you imagine? Especially siding with the U.S., friendlier trade relations with the U.S. will be very good for both countries. You also have the new Bolivian president, Rodriguez Paz Pereira. He is also right, and he is working on breaking mining contracts with Russia and China that, funny thing, are not as lucrative as contracts with the United States would be. Funny how that works, how Russia and China exploit countries that have leftist leaders in order to get, a cheap deal, right? Anyway. So you have that. Javier Milei in Argentina is pulling way ahead of his potential opponent in the 2027 presidential election. So things are already looking better in the Americas, and the pressure on Venezuela has only helped that. Venezuela has been a problem for a long time. It's about time we stepped up and did something about Venezuela. But the pressure is good. That said, the prospect of actually invading Venezuela is not, that's not going to happen. But the international pressure has been good. And that's also pressure on Cuba. Seizing the oil tankers out there by Venezuela is frustrating China. It's frustrating Iran. It's frustrating Russia. It's scaring them because, Russia exports oil and we could start seizing the shadow fleet, which should have been doing all along. China relies heavily on oil. Iran produces oil too, and sells it illegally, trying to get around sanctions. So, this shows, this is a big problem for all of these countries. But I just want to take a minute to talk about. Think about, Venezuela is a very wealthy country when it comes to minerals, oil, and natural resources. Just imagine if Venezuela had a free market economy where Venezuelans could benefit from all of that instead of starving. It's just, it's frustrating that, meanwhile, in Argentina, in Chile, in Bolivia, these countries now have more right-leaning presidents, and they're headed in the right direction, and their prospects are much better. poverty rate and inflation, all the problems in Argentina, all of it's come down. It's all so much better. So that's a path worth following. All right, real quick, China, the Axis powers. But before I get to Russia, which is the more active Axis power, China is still a problem. Chinese fishing fleets, you may not know this, are going around the world destroying fisheries. So, like, Chinese fishing fleets are just outside of Chile's and Peru's economic zone, way over there on the other side of the Pacific from China, and they're electrocuting and otherwise killing fish in very large numbers, and that is destroying fisheries. And obviously, these fisheries are the core of the economy for a lot of the fishing villages and towns along the coast. So that's going to cause a lot of problems for the people who live there. Um, you know, could we do something about that? Maybe. Little bit by little bit, those countries are starting to push back. But, we are the United States. We could say something. All right. If China wants to continue to trade with us, they need to stop trying to take over the South China Sea. They need to stop threatening their neighbors. They need to stop sending fishing boats all around the world to terrorize the world's oceans. This is the kind of stuff that, Trump isn't doing a great job on this. He's focused more on like getting a trade deal with the Chinese that kind of puts them in a less dangerous situation for America's trade. And that's a good thing. But he just doesn't seem to have answers for this. We can try to change the name of the Department of Defense to Department of War, but it's like the city's on fire and we're changing the name of the fire department. There's still no answer to these fishing things. We're just getting into the shadow oil fleet a little bit. There's so many of these problems, and sometimes I feel like we're not actually getting anywhere with it. All right. End of rant. I just want to see more action on this stuff, it's frustrating. Iran continuing to be a problem. They're agitating. A lot of Israelis are thinking that it'd be better just to go ahead and hit Iran again rather than wait for them to attack. And then, of course, that means we're warmongers. You don't fight battles on your enemy's terms. Okay, you don't charge uphill to fortified positions unless you absolutely have to, or you have some advantage. But that's not the way you want to fight a battle. All right, the idea is to fight on your terms, right? And if we want to fight Iran on our terms, it means we may have to strike first. But the Axis powers are definitely still there. There's definitely still a threat, and they're trying to make whatever trouble they can. Okay, Russia, Ukraine. Russia was, on paper at least, a very dangerous military power until recently. And since the war in Ukraine, they've shown that they can't even conquer Ukraine, which didn't even have a military 10 years ago. Their military has shown signs of corruption and rot and graft, and just they have not performed well. But it's more than just that. You see, in the last 9 missile tests that the Russians have launched, their ballistic missiles have failed in one way or another. They've either blown up on the launch pad or blown up shortly after launch. We test ballistic missiles every now and then to prove that they still work and, prove it to ourselves and to our enemies. So every now and then, the U.S. takes a Minuteman III missile down to Vanderbilt Space Force base, and we launch it and just, hey, our Minuteman III still launch. Every now and then, and I did this in the submarine service too, we launch a Trident II missile. One of the, they're all we used to have the Trident C4 missiles. Now they're all Trident II D5s throughout the fleet. But anyway, we launched the D5 missiles and just show, hey, they still launch from the submarines. It's just a reminder to our potential enemies that these systems still work. The Russians do the same thing, except that 5 of the last 9 tests have failed. So, based on that, and it could, this is one of the questions, is this representative, right? And, we have no way of knowing. If Russia tried to launch all their missiles at the U.S. right now, in terms of the nuclear strategic threat, right? It kind of looks like more than half of their missiles wouldn't even launch. They blow up in the silos or blow up shortly after launch, right? They would not get this far. Now, my friends, just real quick, oh my God, this missile technology is so fickle, this stuff is so technical. Everything has to go right. I mean, you have no idea that just that all of the mechanism, all of the technology that goes into these things, if any one thing is wrong, they call it the silent service for a reason. We don't talk. First rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club. So I'm not going to talk a lot about strategic weapons in the U.S. Navy and that kind of thing. But I just want to make the point. I mean, these are very difficult things to maintain. We spend a lot of money and do a lot of work to maintain these missiles so that they are in working conditions. But anything could go wrong. If the guidance system fails, if there's a variance in the flight path, and I've talked about, a 1 degree variation in flight path is huge. Right, a Russian missile with a 1 degree variation of flight path, instead of landing on an American Minuteman III silo in North Dakota, will land, harmlessly in the Pacific Ocean. Right, a 0.1%, a 0.01% variation will drive it far off course. Okay, so you have to be able to launch these missiles. They have to fly according to their pre-planned flight path. All of that has to go right. The once it gets out, the launch vehicle gets out into space. It's got the multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. These are the warheads, and it launches those. All of that has to work right, and those have to be launched at just the right angle. Too shallow an angle, they can bounce off the atmosphere and disappear off into space, or too sharp an angle, they'll burn up in reentry and they won't hit their targets. All of that has to go just right. Then the warhead has to detonate. And the detonation of these thermonuclear weapons, I mean, you have a small plutonium core, kind of like the Fat Man bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki, that triggers the explosion. And then the deuterium and the tritium are your secondary. That's where the power is. That's where we get the 300 kiloton boosted warheads. That's where we get the megaton thermonuclear warheads. That's where the Big Bang is, right? Is in the secondary explosion. Russia doesn't make enough tritium. Like they can't possibly have enough tritium. The U.S. spends, what we spend maintaining our nuclear forces every year is what Russia spent on their defense budget, their entire defense budget before the war in Ukraine. They can't possibly be making enough deuterium and tritium to keep their weapons up to date. So you look at this and it's like, they do fire them and everything goes right and the warhead comes down. There's no tritium in there. When it detonates, it's going to fizzle. There will not be a secondary explosion, right? You won't get the fusion. That's the hydrogen bomb aspect. You just get the tactical nuke. Now, don't get me wrong. A 4 to 6 kiloton explosion is still serious. That's about the power that destroyed Hiroshima. Detonate that over Los Angeles or a major U.S. city. It's going to cause a lot of deaths and casualties, but nothing like a 1 megaton explosion. A 1 megaton explosion wipes out the whole Los Angeles metro area and kills, 10 million people, as opposed to a little fizzle that kills, maybe 100,000, and most of our infrastructure there survives. We don't want to find out. I'm not saying that we should be callous or, that we should be carefree or that we should somehow, taunt the Russians over this. I'm just making the point that, Russia is a paper tiger now. Their nuclear arsenal is increasingly irrelevant. They are weakening by the day. A defeat in Ukraine is the end of Russia as a threat, and then China is isolated. China doesn't want this war to end. They can't see this war end because that distraction is the only thing that's keeping China moving. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's and JD Vance on the other hand wants to take Putin's side and spread Russian narratives and we're sending all our money to Ukraine, and turn against our allies and let the Chinese do whatever they want. Yeah, that's China first for you. I prefer supporting American power and America leading the world. Something like 85% of Republicans agree with me, and hopefully most of you guys, although you're free to disagree with it, that America should be a force for good in the world, right? And that sort of thing. Okay, so the war in Ukraine has continued. Russia's advanced at a snail's pace up till this time. However, Ukraine is now reporting that they have liberated Kupiansk, this village that Russia's been fighting over for months and months and months. And the Russians were trying to claim that they had taken it, and the Ukrainians have cleared Kupiansk. So Ukraine is actually driving the Russians back in at least one area. But if you look at it, I mean, you know, in 2 years, they've advanced from, there was this big thing over Bakhmut. The Russians captured Bakhmut in the Donbass. And if you didn't know better, you'd think that the capture of Bakhmut was tantamount to the capture of Berlin, like this major military victory. It was this tiny nothing town in the Donbass that the Russians captured. They're now fighting in Avdiivka, which is 5 kilometers to the west. So in 2 years, the Russians have advanced at most 5 kilometers in a number of places. This is one of those things like going back to World War I and arguing that, the Germans have gained, a couple of kilometers here, they must be winning. No, this is not how this works. Okay. Ukraine isn't losing. They need our support, to win this. Meanwhile, all this, negotiations that have been going on this last round that has been incompetently run by Witkoff and what have you, it's been a disaster and a complete train wreck. Russia still hasn't agreed to it. They took this last round, it looks like what happened is they took Russia's demands and translated them into English. That's the document that got leaked and spread around. Then they took those to Ukraine, knocked a bunch of things off of there, and the Ukrainians were willing to do this or that, and then took it back to the Russians, and the Russians said no. They're not willing to accept that. So this is already fit. But the way Trump is acting, like somehow Ukraine started this war, he continues to say that, which is, I don't understand how a man who is otherwise capable of understanding so many things could say things so stupid sometimes, The Russia issue really makes him look like a child. Like he has no idea what he's doing. He's not the deal maker and the master businessman that he is when he's dealing with Russia for some reason. It's just unfortunate. But anyway, so what do the Russians want? They still want their maximalist aims. They want Zelensky out. They want the whole Donbass, even the parts that they haven't conquered yet. Which would, of course, destroy the most significant fortifications in Europe that are currently holding the Russians back. Again, all of these things they want, Ukraine's military limited and all this kind of stuff. All of this they want, no European troops there, all this stuff so that they can put themselves in a better position to start the next war in a year or two. Heck, if they wait till J.D. Vance is president, then they can do whatever they want, right? Then it'll be open season. Right? America will abandon all of its allies. So this is unacceptable. And meanwhile, the pressure's been put on Ukraine. Ukraine has made compromise after compromise and then offered concession after concession. Latest, Zelensky's announced that Ukraine will give up its bid to join NATO if they can get proper security guarantees. These security guarantees are worthless. We've watched. We gave Ukraine security guarantees. Russia walked right in and we did nothing. Right. They're murdering Ukrainian citizens and we've done nothing. Right. So we're not going to do anything in the future either. All of this is just the Russians trying to set themselves up so that they can attack again. A lasting peace can only be achieved if Russia is forced to make peace. And the only way that's going to happen is if Russia is defeated on the battlefield. Now, all these people, well, that's not realistic, or pull your head out of your backside or whatever. What I just said is true. All the experts agree on that. And, being an expert still means something. Knowing things still means something, just because I have all kinds of podcasters who come out here and I know more. And granted, I'm just a lawnsman, so what do I know? But I happen to be a fairly bright one, I think. Everyone says the same thing. I've been saying it all along. If you know Vladimir Putin, you know this is the case. Okay? That's the only way this is going to end. And we're not pursuing that path. And the more we mess around trying to make deals or whatever, the weaker we look and the more Putin thinks he's winning. Has no incentive to end the war. All right. That's what I have for this time. My friends, I have a lot more to talk about, so I'm going to have to start making more episodes, aren't I? Because there are more topics I want to cover. The last hostage in Gaza has not been recovered yet. And I said that I would keep the outro music, October Rain, the original version of Hurricane by Eden Golan. And this So I'm keeping that as the outro music. YouTube keeps hitting me for the copyright for it, although they don't restrict my videos. But until the remains of the last hostage are returned, I will keep that promise. I'm keeping that outro music, but I'll be changing it when we do get that person back. So with that, I will say, as always, goodbye, Lehitrot.
Of the history, stand with me, look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and flowers, life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy, everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and flowers, life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. feeling schon אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום, כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home.